Thank you so much. Me and Giacomo, you already have a question? If you have a question, please line up, of course. Se avete delle domande, potete ovviamente prenotarvi. Giacomo and I are big fan of you. And all of your presentation. I think I forwarded your PDF a couple of times in the last few months saying, why aren't we not yet able to do this kind of presentation and so on? It's so thoughtful and really deep in what we're doing. Giacomo, you want to ask the question? Because I have a couple of ones. Right, go for it.
I'm very excited. So I'll, no, thanks, Ben. That was super interesting. My question is actually, and I know it's very unpredictable, but I have tried Manus. I was one of those like fake waiting lists of these agentic AI, which actually make tasks for you. And when using it, I thought, damn, if this thing is going to happen massively, and probably that's going to happen in some way, and there will be AI agents like browsing the web and going around the web. I was wondering, well, then that changes a lot in terms of the whole business model of the internet, because the internet is now basically, all around, online, mainly around online advertising. But then if AI agents go around the internet, how will, people actually, doing advertising be able to distinguish between human eyes and AI agents, like going around and seeing your products and services?
The question is?
The question is this, like from a technological perspective, is this an actual issue, or technologically it's easy or feasible for advertising people to distinguish between a human eye and an AI agent? Thank you.
So there's two or three answers to this. One of them is kind of at a very narrow level. It's relatively straightforward for a company to say, we're going to declare that this agent isn't allowed to use our website. And if they do, any way you can sue them. I think the problem for an ad-funded publisher is not that some of your traffic will be from AI agents. The problem will be that nobody's seeing those ads because the content is being ingested into different AI models that are using them, synthesizing your content and generating answers to people without anybody coming to your website or seeing the ad at all. That's a much bigger kind of existential question. I think there's maybe two or three kind of sort of strands to pull on here. The first is why are there 100,000 chocolate chip cookie recipes on the internet? Why are there 100,000 recipes for how do you make a spaghetti carbonara? It's not because there are 100,000 opinions. I mean, this is Italy. There are 50,000 opinions on how you make carbonara. But no, it's because of Google. And so that, some of that vast amount of generic content only existed because of how the internet worked, and it will get abstracted away. Another answer is you have to ask, what is it that can't be synthesized? What is it that you're not just asking for an answer, you're providing an experience, a brand, recommendation, suggestion, expertise, or something other than just the answer to the question. I think a third answer is there was this phone company that launched a phone at the beginning of last year called Rabbit, and they claimed they were going to be able to do all of this. And the demo that they had is the founder says, hey, book me a 2-week family holiday in Europe. The defaults are fine. That's not how anybody does anything. And so you have to draw it. And the challenge with some of the more excited commentary around agents is I will just say, hey, I want to move from Rome to London, sort it out for me. There's an awful lot of questions within that. And it's not just that the AI probably won't be able to do it. You couldn't ask a human being to do that for you either. So there's a layer around AI agents, which is, will the AI agent actually be able to do the thing? And then the second is, even if you'd asked a person to do that, would you want to? Is that how any of this works? Travel agents are a thing, but you don't just say, I'm going to Tokyo for 2 weeks, book me a trip. Do me an itinerary for every day, and I'll just do it. That isn't how this works. So I think some of this is, as you always see in the early stages of a new technology, very sort of utopian and simplistic. And I'm not sure it will work like that for a lot of real use cases.
It's a line of engineers or students, engineering students, so good luck with that. Bye.
Good afternoon. You have talked about how every technology wave create new platforms, then new monopolies. How can we, as user and future builders, avoid repeating the same cycle of dependency?
Cycle of, sorry, what's the last word?
Qual è l'ultima parola? Lo stesso ciclo del...
Dependency.
So, I mean, any intellectual framework is useful but has limitations. So you can say, you know, is this a platform? Well, it depends. What do you mean by platform? If you bought a car in 1900, you couldn't buy a car. You got a chassis, and then you would choose your wheels. And if you look at like reports from car races, it will list like which spark plugs the cars are using, and which brake pads they're using, and what tires. When you buy a car, should you have to know what the spark plugs are, or you should just be able to buy a car? The same with the PC. Should you have to know how many pins the memory has, or should you just be able to buy a PC and know that it's got enough memory? And so this is kind of the layer of abstraction. You shouldn't have to know every single thing about how every single thing that you use works. Like, what sewing machine was used to make your trousers? I don't care. Why should you have to know that? So there's always those layers of abstraction, and you can call that a platform, if you like. Is a sewing machine a platform? It depends what the word means. Are you dependent on the sewing machine company? Again, I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it. Now, you don't want to get into a situation where the people who make the sewing machine company decide what the trousers cost, and decide who can start a textile company, and decide who can sell clothes. So you don't want that kind of closed system, which is what we had with cable television or AOL or IBM. But we don't really have that now. You can choose from 2 different phone companies, and they both let you install thousands or millions of apps. You can buy Android if you like that, or you can buy an iPhone if you like that. There are 20 companies making AI models. You can download a bunch of them. They're open source. So it's not clear that we have that kind of that we're going to have that kind of closed model at the moment, because this technology is so open, because it's so widely understood, that it's, you know, we saw DeepSeek is a Chinese hedge fund, for fuck's sake, and they went out and built themselves a cutting-edge model. And yes, it took them $500 million, but that's just because you need a lot of infrastructure. So I don't think you're going to have that kind of closed model with this technology.
Cool. Vai. Puoi anche farlo in italiano, se preferisci, come preferite voi. Vai. Vai.
Okay. If AI will write code and maybe even design for us, what is left for us to master? What is your advice for young people who want to stay creatively and economically relevant?
Well, this has always been the line is that you should learn to be a plumber, because that's something that can't be automated. Plus, I mean, I live in New York, and you don't want to know what it costs to hire a plumber in New York. That's all partly the mafia, partly the unions, partly regulation. So I think a more useful answer to your question is, yes, if there are people saying that I used AI to write 90% of my code, but if you write an iPhone app, Apple wrote 90% of your code. Apple wrote the graphics drivers, they wrote the modem drivers, they wrote the file system, they wrote the camera subsystem, they wrote you're using 90% of the code that your iPhone app uses was written by Apple. The same thing if you write a Windows app, 90% of the code was written by Microsoft. If you write a cloud app and deploy it on AWS, 90% of the code was written by Amazon, and then a bunch of code was written by like Broadcom and Cisco and like people who are further down the stack. See, I think this is just another layer of abstraction. And what it means is like you won't have to do all the really, really boring donkey crap that you have to do now. And you remove that layer. I mean, it's the same thing with my point about Excel. You know, the joke I always make here is that like before Excel, junior investment bankers worked really long hours. But now they can leave work at lunchtime on Friday and go home. And of course, that's not what happened. What happened was Excel meant that you could do a week of work in 5 minutes. So now you have twice as many people because you can do way more. You have price elasticity. So it seems to me that what will happen is there'll just be way more software. And you'll need way more software engineers to build it and run it and manage it because it will be there'll be so much more that you can do. I mean, in a sense, this is like a macroeconomics point. Whenever you have new automation or new technology, there are some old jobs go away, some jobs get way more work, and some jobs kind of stay the same. So it'll be the same with this.
Do you think it's going to be the same?
Yeah, I mean, there are these two basic views about what happens to jobs. There's the view that any first-year economics student can tell you, which is, like, 200 years ago, we were all peasants. Like, 90% of us were agricultural laborers. So why is it that now we're not all unemployed? Well, because there were new jobs. And it's always much easier to see the jobs that will go away than to see the new jobs that will come, because they don't exist. But that's always, but then the economist can spend an hour explaining, well, why is it that this is how this always happens? There's another view that says that what's actually been happening is that we've been automating higher and higher level human functions. So we start with the human being as beast of burden. There's a painting some of you might know by Repin, a Russian realist painter, called Barge Haulers on the Volga, which is about 20 people physically acting as donkeys pulling a barge up the river. And just on the horizon, you can see the smoke from a steamboat. And so we automate human beings as beasts of burden, and then we automate like legs, and then we automate arms, and then we automate, and we'll get to the top, and there'll be nothing left. I think that's a very neat syllogism. It's like a neat thesis. It's a neat theory. We've got no way of knowing if that's true, and you could have said that 100 years ago about electricity. So I don't think you can know, and I don't see any a priori reason to just presume that this will be different.
Interesting. Prego.
Europe talks a lot about strategic autonomy, but still relies on for its platforms, chips, and AI models. In your view, is there a realistic path for Europe to lead, or should we focus on regulating what others build?
Well, so the more you regulate, the fewer startups you have. And, I mean, that's not an opinion. That's what any economist will tell you. Like, regulation is a trade-off, and it has costs, and you choose what trade-offs you want. I said when I was speaking that, the AI Act, under the EU's AI Act, you literally are not allowed to download the cutting-edge models without getting a lawyer, because you have to start reporting your use of them. I do think that the EU has sort of taken a view that says that there's no costs to regulation. And you can just add more of these rules, and they all kind of sound okay by themselves, but you just keep adding and adding and adding, and you realize, well, why would I create a startup? I mean, I know, I was talking to an entrepreneur a couple of weeks ago who started his AI company in Berlin and moved to California. Because, he's got 5 employees and they try and start a union, and one of them's fucking useless, but he tries to fire him and he can't. And he discovers it's going to take him 6 months to fire this person after 2 weeks. And those are trade-offs. You can decide what you want those to be, but you can't just act like those trade-offs don't exist. That's the core of it. Economics is a system. And you pull this lever, that lever will move, and you can't say, well, we have the democratic autonomy to determine that the lever won't move. It will move. So that's one answer to the question. I think a second answer is that some of these technologies have very large economies of scale effects. The US is very upset that it's dependent on chips that are made in China, in Taiwan. America does not have cutting-edge semiconductor. Nobody has cutting-edge semiconductor fabrication other than TSMC, which is a Taiwanese company. TSMC is dependent on lithography machines from ASML, which is Dutch. Samsung is like a generation behind ASML. Intel is 2 generations behind TSMC. Intel is 2 generations behind TSMC. No one in America is very happy about that. Do you want to invest $100 billion a year over the next 5 years to do something about it? No one in America or Europe is really willing to do that either. So then you have to ask, well, where are we going to decide that it's okay that we're dependent on that company or those organizations? And where are we going to build further up the stack? And this is kind of the reason why I keep mentioning open source over and over again. You can download the Gemma model from Google, which is like their best model from 6 months ago. You can download Llama from Meta, which was the best model a year ago. They're a bit behind now. You can download models from DeepSeek. You can download a bunch of this stuff is open source. And so you can complain or you can go and build stuff. And personally, I would be more interested in saying, why isn't Cursor, which is an AI software development app, a European company, than saying, why isn't TSMC a European company?
Hi, Ben. Thank you for your presentation. I'm a long-time reader and subscriber. So assuming that we do get to AGI, whatever that means, some kind of strong, consistently robust system, and assume we do figure out sort of the GUI level, maybe the team of I.O. and Johnny Ive at OpenAI will figure that out. But if we do get to that level, my question is about risk. And I'm not talking about safety. I'm not talking about Google's image generation model creating images of black US presidents. I'm not talking about job automation, although that's probably a concern for some people. I'm mostly talking about misalignment. I'm talking about loss of control. And normally I wouldn't listen to the Luddites saying these things. I don't want to talk about the sort of Yutkowskian level of extremism and dying from AI. But when you hear people that seem like uninterested parties, people from academia like Bengio and Hinton and Ethan Mollick and journalists like, I don't know, Casey Newton and Kevin Roos, or other people from policy like Jack Clark at Anthropic, or Miles Brundage from OpenAI, all these people from different parts, they all seem to be at least sympathetic to the cause. I ask myself, is this just a Silicon Valley problem that doesn't exist? Is it a nothing burger that's overhyped, or there's actual real concern there that we should at least try to focus on a little bit?
So I think there's a sort of philosophical problem here, or a psychological problem, philosophical problem, which is that we don't have any sort of theoretical model for how human intelligence works. Or indeed intelligence in general. We don't know what it is that we have that a dog or an octopus or a raven doesn't have. We don't know what a dog or an octopus or a raven have, in very different ways, incidentally, that an ant doesn't have. We can sort of say at a kind of a philosophical sense, well, clearly there is something there, but we don't really know what it is or why or how to measure it. We also don't really know why large language models produce the results that they do, and we don't really know what would happen if we keep improving them. My point is, you can't really do a chart and say, well, a person's here, and a raven's there, and an octopus is here, and ChatGPT 3.5 was here, and ChatGPT 4 is there, and it's going to reach the singularity in August 2029. Like, we don't know any of those things. And so it's a little bit, and so this means that every conversation around AI sort of becomes a hunt for analogies. And so people say, well, it's like nuclear weapons, or it's like a meteorite, or it's like a biological thing. And of course, it's not any of those things. And and any analogy is always sort of it checks some boxes and doesn't check some other things. It's similar in some ways and not similar in others. And you have to be careful of not being captured by your analogy. It's actually my earlier point. You have to be careful of not being captured by words like platform and understand that they're just kind of tools for understanding. The analogy I like, hunting for analogies, is to say, imagine that we were trying to go to the moon. We're building the Apollo program. We have no theory of gravity, and we have no theory of rockets. Like, we don't know what the moon is or how far away it is or how any of that works. We don't know what orbital mechanics is. We also don't know why the rocket works. We know it goes up. We don't know why. And we don't know what would happen if we made it 50% bigger. Like, we can't do the calculation like, the fuel lines would break or something. We don't know. And yet, we did make the rocket 50% bigger, and it didn't blow up, and it went higher. So if we keep making it bigger, will it go to the moon? Well, maybe, but we don't know, and we don't have any way of forecasting that. And so then this becomes a question of, well, how do you think about that kind of uncertainty? It's almost like, and I'm sure this is almost, you should have a philosophy professor here. It's like, what's his name, Peter Singer, talking about, well, why is it that you spend €5 on a coffee, but you don't donate €1 to a charity that will stop a child in Africa from going blind? Why did you do that? Isn't that objectively evil? And the answer is, I suppose so, and I'm going to go and buy coffee. And there are a lot of those sorts of questions where, like, what's the right answer to this isn't necessarily very clear, and it isn't clear that there is an answer. The challenge I have with the sort of the Duma view is it always kind of reminds me of the Descartes fallacy, and I'm going to kind of mangle Descartes terribly. But it seems to me that one way you can think about what Descartes did was he looked at Isaac Newton and said, holy shit, you can just work this out. You don't need to find a missing book of Ptolemy to understand how the universe works. You can just look and you can do the maths and you can calculate it. So maybe we could calculate God too. So he said, well, let's start from first principles. We'll be like mathematicians. We'll start from our basic premises, like God must be good, God must be this, God, and we can calculate 45 propositions later, you've got to the answer is Martin Luther right or is Calvin right? And of course, you can't create knowledge out of thin air like that. And that's what the Doomers all try and do. They say, well, let's just kind of reason our way to whether AGI is possible and reason our way to whether it would kill us all. And they reason their way to saying, well, it's possible and it's going to kill us all, just as Descartes reasoned his way to saying that God existed. But you can't create knowledge like that. And so all of which is a very long, very philosophical, very French way of saying we don't know. And so how do you think about a risk that is theoretically possible, but we don't know? It's possible. In fact, we know that there are meteorites. We know that meteorites have destroyed all life on Earth. So why have we not built a bunker? Well, it's complicated.
First, thank you for being here again. Just a quick question on safety, trust, this topic. I think the progress has been so fast on AI, on ChatGPT, all of it. And as we said, 1 out of 10 people is using it every day. But it seems to me that these companies are kind of self-regulating it. My question is, should someone else be involved? Is this too much progress? What's your view on that?
Well, remember there was this open letter in the spring of 2023 that said we should stop all research for 6 months. And those people all look like idiots. Because, well, what happened? We didn't stop it, and what happened? And again, these are kind of unfalsifiable statements. We should stop all research because we did this thought experiment. And meanwhile, I'm kind of half joking when I say, what am I supposed to do? Put my laptop in a plastic bag full of bleach? But it's kind of true. What is it that you mean when you say this thing might escape control and kill us all? You could connect a database to the nuclear weapons now, and it would launch the nuclear weapons. So I feel like there's a sort of systemic pattern of overstating how big this change is and understating how many times we've had these changes before, and yet we seem to be okay. The other answer is, of course, this might be the answer to the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox is there must be more intelligent life out there. We can't be the only one, so where is it? And the answer is, well, they all invent AGI and it kills them. Or at a certain stage, every society builds a Large Hadron Collider and it causes a mini black hole and destroys the society. Maybe.
Hello, thanks for being here. It's so cool to be asking you a question here. So also congrats to the FPS team, because it's so cool. It's so tough to pick one question for you. I think we are seeing that the way we used to browse the internet was not efficient, like you were saying this before. We are seeing Google moving to something else. You can browse the internet through OpenAI, you can do it through Perplexity. You can do even more complex stuff, no? Like through the model context protocol, you can just chat with a database instead of reading line by line or boring stuff that are making life easier, especially for consultants, I guess. And what strikes me is that the breakthrough technology as being a chat, no? Like the interface of ChatGPT is a chat indeed, which is not groundbreaking in a sense. My question is, what if the AI revolution is not just bringing us to make things better, faster, but differently? Like interface concretely will shift and be something else. Maybe Word, like a Google document, like Microsoft Word, doesn't need to be like 100% me like typing, but maybe half an agent, like a chat, like an AI thing, and words compilating. Like, what if interface will shift, and what if we'll get to the point where we'll be talking to a computer, as Steve Jobs promised, in a sense, but also maybe where Johnny Ive and Sam Altman want to go with this new mysterious thing they want to build. So what about the interface shift we may be experiencing?
So I think there's kind of two strands in this. One very simple split is how much do you get presented with the chatbot, which is like the underlying technology is that's what it is. The chatbot is not a UI put on top. The model is a chatbot. That's what the technology does. And how much should you be presented with that in some way, and how much should that be abstracted away? So if you, a sort of trivial example, but if you have an iPhone and it summarizes your notifications, that is being done with a chatbot, but you don't see it. So there's a whole class of use case where you get a new feature, but you don't actually see the prompt. You don't see the chatbot and the back and forth. You just have a problem solved for you and an answer given to you or a feature created that isn't showing you that at all. Or maybe there's an interface, but the interface isn't that. The interface is something else, that it's abstracted into a GUI in some way. So that's one. Or versus, no, the way it should work is you should actually ask the model. It's like you go to Delphi and you ask the model, what should I do? And you get an answer. So that's kind of one very binary difference. Should you actually be talking to the model at all, or should you be getting something else? I think the second answer to your question is, if you are talking to the thing. If you think about what happened with documents and then with email and then with text, so, I'm just old enough to remember when I was applying for internships and jobs in the late 1990s, like, you had to know the correct way to format your letter. And it's probably different in Italy and different in Germany, like, where's your dress go and where does the date go? And you have to say yours faithfully or yours sincerely in English. I mean, I'm sure there's an equivalent in Italian, like, what are the different forms of salutations you're supposed to use? And the French, do you use the formal form or the informal term? And then you go to email, and for like the first 5 years, people would format emails. And then people realized you didn't need to do that anymore. And then you just reply to the email with 2 lines. And then you go to text messages, and then it shifts again. So you get these changes in abstraction change how you communicate to the thing. And those patterns kind of emerge naturally over time as you have the thing. You work out the right ways to communicate with it. And people work out the right ways to do it. I mean, another interesting analogy would be to look at something like Tinder. If you look at all the dating companies, I mean, there's always the joke is that what every computer science student does is they make a to-do app because they have autism, and then they make a dating app because they can't get dates, and they think it's a math problem. I have the same problem. I met my fiance on a dating app. Dating apps are now 50 to 60%.
So did Brian Chesky from Airbnb.
So dating apps are now 50 to 60% of all new relationships in the USA, incidentally. So this is sort of a fundamental shift. But the point I was going to make is Tinder, because all the dating apps before this thought that this was a statistics problem and you needed to get more data. So you needed to work out ways of getting people to tell you all this stuff about themselves. And Tinder works out, no, we'll turn the whole thing the other way around. We'll make this gamified mechanical Turk UI. We'll change how you use the thing. And it took 20 years for people to suddenly they realize, no, that's how you do it. And we'll have those kinds of flashes of intuition in how you change how you interact with these things.
Fantastic. We have 3 minutes for question and answers, so because we're running a bit late.
That's quick from my side. Okay, good afternoon. I just have more than a question. I have a consideration that I want to share with you. You have shown before the change that occurred after implementing Excel spreadsheet, like electronic spreadsheet, that caused an acceleration of the daily job of an employee. So it means that something that taken 10 hours then turned in 10 minutes. Don't you think that the implementation of new technologies have caused somehow the increase of turbo capitalism and consequently some of the main problems that affect the society as discrepancies, pollution and environmental issues? And my second question is, do we really need all of these technologies?
So a sort of simple answer to the question is, I studied history at university, mostly medieval history, and I was doing a term looking at monasticism, and talking about, well, why is it that there's a shift from the Benedictines, whose whole model is they kind of withdraw from the world and pray for it, but they're not very interested in poverty, to the wave of the friars, the Franciscans, the wave of clerical poverty, and monasticism as being about poverty. And I was very confused by this, and my professor said, look, poverty is always attractive to the rich. If you're not worried about your children dying of preventable diseases, if you're not worried that your children don't have clean water, that there are no schools, that you won't eat, then you talk about turbo-capitalism. If you would quite like your children to have air conditioning and a refrigerator, then capitalism seems kind of like a good thing. So these are kind of luxury concerns. I mean, one could also, of course, point out that the most polluted countries are the former communist countries, but that's a sort of slightly unfair point. I don't know. You can always kind of draw a line and say, well, we're rich enough now. And then you can turn around and say, yes, but if my grandparents had said that, then actually we probably wouldn't want to go back to that society. You have to manage the problems that come with those, but I don't think that increasing wealth is a bad thing.
Gabri, super quick.
All right, really quick. Very interesting, so I think the social angle as well. The element I wanted to ask was the time element, because I loved your donkey barge analogy, but the speed of the change, what is the role of government, especially in a welfare state? Okay, so ChatGPT is one thing, Gen AI is one thing. What about agentic AI, which I can already see, right? So inevitably, it will cause some job losses, and these are higher income job losses. The time to reskill to be a plumber or a software engineer, the high income people who will lose their job, who's going to pay for that in a welfare state? Or what should we do? Do you see that coming, or
so
is that
I think
a doomer scenario?
So two very quick answers. Like every new technology causes frictional disruption, and there are always jobs that go away and new jobs that get created. The Luddites, which someone mentioned earlier, were not objecting to new technology per se. They were skilled weavers who were upset because they were losing their livelihoods. And so every new technology has these effects, and that's happened over and over again for the last 150 years. Is this faster now? I'm not sure, actually. First of all, I mean, kind of some of the charts that I showed is, no, it won't all happen tomorrow. It will take 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Think about, your experience when you book a flight, try to pay your taxes or book a plane ticket and realize you're using 30-year-old technology. It does actually take a lot longer than people think for these technologies to get deployed. After that, I'd kind of refer you to my slide of that there are two kinds of questions, is, well, it will kind of work the way it worked with the other platform shifts.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a great talk. I've been absolutely useless, but thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thanks.